So let's move on. And now we're going to have a shared presentation in science diplomacy, and in particular how and the importance of funding agencies and the scientific organizations behind them. So it's going to be the first speaker is going to be Professor Luis Salvador Carulla. Luis is director of the Health Center University of Canberra and honorary president SRAP. And he's going to be giving the first part of the presentation. And after that, and be fair to introduce you already, and then you just move swiftly to the podium after. It's Mr. Nishant Shandilija, which is the regional representative of Euraxex, sorry, Australia and New Zealand, I guess. It's not that. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sergio. And we thought that this is a forum on the collaborative world, would be better to present it together. So we are providing a different perspective on what is science diplomacy that it's highly related to what Coral was saying before, from the perspective of a scientific organization as ours, and from the perspective of the main information hub on research funding in Europe, Euroaccess. So let me see how it goes. I'm sorry, I don't know where I have to click. Okay. Oh, it's this. Okay, thank you. I am a psychiatrist as background, and one of the characteristics of a psychiatrist is that we have an apraxia. We are not able to do anything with our hands. This is because we devoted to psychiatry and not to neurosurgery. So, and why is science diplomacy? Science diplomacy has been defined as the use of scientific collaboration among nations to address common problems facing the 21st century humanity and to build constructive international partnerships. And of course, we have this general framework, the goals that are related to the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals that have been mentioned this morning. And what we have is, in these international partnerships, a whole network of connections that are related to different perspectives of science diplomacy. Of course, we have the perspective of nations and the role of the embassies in promoting science diplomacy. We have the role of international multi-country organizations like the UN and the World Health Organizations, OECD, that play a major role that is related to the nations. We have the role of large umbrella organizations and advocacy groups. This is very important for instance, in the European Union, the role of NGOs, the role of academia, where many of our universities have international offices or agencies that are working in complementing and working in types of science diplomacy. We have, of course, the role of industry, and we had this morning a series of examples of how important this is, the role of professional organizations, and finally, the role of a research organization as ours. But what are we doing in this field of diplomacy? Do we have any importance in this game? And of course, the role of funding bodies that my colleague will be presenting after this presentation. And of course, all these different stakeholders have different roles and objectives, but they can work in a complementary way, and we can develop an extraordinary collaboration across these stakeholders. But what happened is that most of the work related to science diplomacy has been focusing on the role of states and national public institutions in strengthening cross-country and multilateral collaboration, and not that much in the role of other parts of this very complex system, as these funding organizations and research associations. And what we are going to provide you is these two examples of how these two different types of perspectives are really important in the field of science diplomacy. And we will start by our associations, FRAP. We started our work in 2015. And when we met together several years ago, and we were thinking how SRAP started, it was really funny because every one of us had a different story. And it was fascinating to see how we put together very different experiences in a way that we were able to develop this successful story. And I know what is my story. And my story is that when I arrived to Australia, I saw the wonderful things that this country has. I was appointed as a representative for Australia on health issues in an OECD commission. So I was there on a sudden, just after 6 months, being the representative of Australia there. And we had this meeting. There was a meeting of OECD with the English-speaking countries. And the person who introduced me in this meeting said, this is Professor Luis Salvador Carulla, blah, blah, blah. And although he's from Spain, and I was really shocked. I thought, how is this? Why? He said he really values the work I'm doing. Why? He said, although, when he was referring to my country of origin. And this lighted a red light that something was going on, at least in the area of science diplomacy at the science level, on what is the image, or what was the image of Spain and Spanish researchers, or researchers born in Spain in other environments, particularly in Anglo-Saxon countries. So this drove me to meet the then ambassador of Spain, Enrique Viguera, and talk to him and tell him, I think we have to do something. We need to put together this huge experience, this extraordinary capacity of the Spanish researchers working here, and demonstrate what is the role and our background as something that is contributing to this country. And thanks to Enrique Viguera and then Manuel Cacho, and then our current ambassador, thank you very much for that. Really, we had an incredible support that, as Joaquin was explaining this morning, came also from other institutions, Instituto Cervantes, El Consejo España-Australia, but that was provided, and I think this is very important, for an independent association. We are an association of researchers. We are not a branch of the Spanish government, of the Cultural Cervantes Institute, or no one. We are collaborating in an extraordinary way with other stakeholders in the system. But our role, our perspective is related to empowering, providing leadership, and the proper awareness and visualization of these researchers that are working here in Australia. And in order to do that, we developed this idea of the forums. We are in the 7th forum today. We started in 2015. And the whole idea was not copying other experiences, like, for instance, the experience of the French Association of French Researchers, where there was a traditional scientific event where you have high-level presentations by scientists in the workshop. We have the proper environments to do that, and we are not interested in getting in depth in our own areas of research, but we are interested in knowing what everyone else is doing, having an idea and making connections. The main role of our association is networking and helping us to keep our links to our country of origin, in this case, Spain, and how to improve the relationships between Australia and Spain. So in every one of the forums, we try to have a 50% participation of Australians and Spanish researchers. We try to understand things that are happening in Europe and things that are happening here in Australia. And we selected as the first motto of our forums, the 4 elements, because we don't want it to focus on one thing. So we had the first forum on water, light, air, and earth. Then we had a recap of what had happened in the 5th forum 5 years on. And then we started a new series where we are now, the Brave New World, just taken from Aldous Huxley, this idea of what's happening in our world today. Last year, the world of big data and a collaborative world. And I think the forums are a very clear example of the role of a scientific association in promoting and helping to strengthening these links between Australia and Spain, and at the same time, strengthening the links within researchers and across researchers in Australia. Then we had another very good experience, the Malaspina Award and the collaboration with the Cervantes Institute. And I'm going to talk first about this collaboration with the Cervantes Institute that started even before the forums. And it came from another experience I had that was, I work in health, and I quickly realized that the visualization of health in Spain here in Australia was similar to Algeria, Morocco. I don't want to say anything negative of the role of the health system there, but we were not considered part of the high standard, high level Europe that was France, Germany, of course, United Kingdom, and Italy. We were not there. We were not in this club. And so I met the then director of the Cervantes Institute, Victor Ugarte, and we put forward what was called the Cátedra Cervantes to bring here to Australia key representatives of areas in Spain that could show the capacity of the country in different things. My area is health. I worked mainly in the health aspects, and we were working just bringing here key experiences in the health sector that were extraordinary and they were developed in Spain. We have been doing that till 2019, then COVID came and we stopped. But we have here the regional minister of health in the Basque Country, Rafael Bengoa, explaining what is integrated care. And he provided a very innovative approach that was by far more advanced than what we have in Australia. And then the following year, we invited Rafael Matesanz, who organized the best organ transplant system in the world. And my Australian colleagues were not aware of that. And to that extent that he had problems in the last presentation, in the last talk, and he was not able to provide one talk because one of the groups of people working on organ donation didn't want really to hear this success story. But at the end, after 4 days here, I received a call from the New South Wales governor wanting to talk to him and to congratulate him for what he did. And that was also an incredible experience of success. And then, of course, we have the Malaspina Award. Malaspina led the Spanish World Scientific Expedition in 1789. And this was one of the great expeditions in the Enlightenment, organized by Spain. They visited the western coast of America. They arrived to the Nuka community in Alaska. I am working in a project with them right now, and I'm very happy to do that. And they came to what then was Port Jackson and made the first account of the life in Sydney made by a foreign expedition. Because
please, sorry to interrupt. We got 1 minute only.
Thank you. Yeah. And Joaquin mentioned this morning the previous awardees of the Manaspina Award. I am not going to enter in this now, but I would just like to say that the award this year is related to the enhancing leadership of women researchers. And this is something that we have to develop as a major goal in SRAP. It was started by Ana Vila, who is here, by Ana Rubio and Marina Trigueros. Unfortunately, COVID came and all the program came to a halt. And I hope that they will retake it this year, and that will be one of the beacons of our association. Thank you. And I give the floor to my colleague and friend, Nishan Chandilla.
Thank you, Luis. You can always hear to Luis for quite some long time. He is very knowledgeable and he has lots of experience. So, of course, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this event. It's my first event with SRAP, and it's been a pleasure collaborating with all of you. I'm going to very briefly talk about a few of the things that we need to focus in terms of science diplomacy. And before that, I introduce myself as Nishan Sandilya, Regional Coordinator for Euraxis, Australia and New Zealand. Euraxis is an initiative of the European Commission that addresses barriers to the mobility of researchers and seeks to enhance scientific collaboration between Europe and the rest of the world. Generally, I present 45 minutes on these stuff. Because I have just 10 minutes, I'd not take much time on the background and maybe move on to the crust. And a very quick overview of the science diplomacy and EU ecosystem. You can see that there are 6 approximate parties that involve in science diplomacy. And of course, if you look at the EU delegation, which comes under EEAS, DGRTD, which is the main responsible for research and innovation in European Commission. And further down at the bottom, you can see Euraxis Worldwide. So it's an initiative that comes together and tries to form international cooperation between Europe and the rest of the world, right? And what is science diplomacy in these current times? So you cannot imagine the coronavirus response as an individual nation, right? So when WHO announced this global call for action in 2020, I think it was on 24th April, yes. President Ursula von der Leyen actually came up with this idea of coronavirus global response, right? And there was this pledging event, which happened on 23rd or 27th of June, and there was close to 16 billion pledged. This is an example of science diplomacy, and when science comes together and brings out tangible result, right? So if you look at science diplomacy and Horizon Europe, now let's touch on Horizon Europe. What is Horizon Europe? I'm sure a lot of you might be already aware it's the largest research and innovation program in the world with an approximate budget of 95.5 billion euros, right? When Horizon Europe was being framed out, there were 3 guiding principles of science diplomacy that was instilled in this particular program. So the first guiding principle was promoting interdisciplinary research through new elements. What were those new elements? Clusters to tackle societal challenges, which we'll see later on. The second important part was missions on sustainable cities, soil and food, climate, oceans, and cancer that will involve citizen. I'm aware that there are researchers in these fields. So of course, you'll be interested in exploring Horizon Europe more. The second part is joining forces and working together through joint research, which is why we need to work together more closely. We'll see slightly further how we can do that. And the last part is on open data and continuing the modus operandi of open science. Now, very quickly on Horizon Europe, which is an instrument of science diplomacy. I'd like to term it like that. Because Horizon Europe, what it did was it has like 3 pillars, pillar 1, pillar 2, and pillar 3. Of course, I do not want to give false promises, but what we need to understand is Pillar 1, irrespective of whether Australia is considered as a third country or an associate country, Pillar 1 is open for Australian researchers and institutions to receive European funding, right? That is what we need to clarify. There is a lot of misconception about Horizon 2020 previously and Horizon Europe that it was closed, which is not the reality. Pillar 1, you can still avail European funding. Pillar 2 and Pillar 3, this is where it's slightly tricky. How can you get involved in these clusters? Health, culture, civil, digital, climate, food, and Jersey, of course, included there. There are possibilities where, as an Australian institution, you can participate in a consortium, right? There are 3 ways. When there is nothing involved, nothing mentioned in the call topic about Australia, you will not receive funding. You are open to participate, you will not receive funding. The second category is when it says international cooperation is encouraged. It is where you might get funding. You have to sell your case. The third one, where explicitly Australia is mentioned, of course, you will receive funding, right? This is where it's interesting, because if you look at the work program for the 2 years, which has budget allocated for international cooperation, it's around 3 billion euros, which is quite a considerable amount. What has happened is Australia currently is not an associated country. That's why we have to slightly look at things from international cooperation perspective. When the calls mention international cooperation, that is when Australian institutions can be eligible for funding. Now, I'll leave this presentation with 3 particular questions for you. A part of Horizon Europe is Marie Sklodowska-Curie Actions, which is on mobility of researchers. The first thing that I want to point out is look at the Europeans coming to Australia by nationality and look at Spain. It's the #1 country in terms of numbers, 74 on Marie Sklodowska-Curie Actions. Look at the Australians going to Europe by nationality, Spain 2, okay? I'll not say anything there. Now let's look at what's next. So of course, it's an excellent initiative to see a lot of you come here. What we are trying to also do is work with all these diaspora groups and form something called European Scientific Diaspora. It's a very noble institution or a forum that you have brought together. And we want to build on this and also build on other similar diaspora network and form something called ESDA. And this is something that we are doing on the background. I hope to work closely with SRAP and DAD, AFRAN, and bring something that networks all the EU member states and all the researchers in these member states and have a common voice of researchers. And the last thing is this one. I leave this with you. This was a quote that Sune Bergstrom said in 1982 in the banquet address. Science does not know any national border. The scientists of world are forming an invisible network with a very free flow of scientific information. I'm leaving this up to you to think how further have we progressed since 1982? Do we need to be more collaborative? Do we need to be more open towards coming together and forming something that is going to bring tangible results? With that, I think I'll end my presentation. And myself and Luis, thank you very much for your attention. And we are open to questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much both for the fantastic presentation. In the interest of time, I'm going to actually let people ask 10 questions in the break after, before under the prize, if you don't mind. And thank you so much again. And I'm sorry that we're a bit late, but thank you. So thank you both speakers again.